The young pianist had always loved the quiet corners of her life, where the only audience was the sunlight on her music sheets and the occasional curious cat that wandered into the room. Music was her companion, her teacher, and sometimes her only friend. She had played for years in small gatherings, at local cafes, and at friends' parties, but never in a place that felt important or official. The thought of performing in front of a larger crowd had always been distant, almost like a story she read rather than one she lived. She had a gentle confidence, a calm way of touching the keys, and a way of making simple melodies sound like the world was holding its breath. It was one ordinary afternoon when a letter arrived, carried in a crisp envelope with a seal that made her heart skip. She hesitated before opening it, half expecting it to be a mistake, a wrong address, or some kind of joke. But as she unfolded the letter, her eyes scanned the words, and she felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. She had been invited to perform at a music hall she had admired from afar. It was not one of the huge, famous halls that drew headlines, but it was respected, elegant, and known for hosting moments that lingered in people's memories. They asked her to play a simple piece, something that could welcome the audience gently into the evening. She read the words again, as if she could memorize the importance of it. Simple, they said. Easy. Relaxed. And she thought she could do that. She wanted to do that. Days passed and she prepared quietly in her small practice room. She chose a piece she knew well, something flowing and soft, a melody that seemed to hug the listener rather than startle them. She practiced in the mornings when the light spilled on the piano keys, and in the evenings when the moon painted silver streaks on the floor. Sometimes she would play without thinking, letting her fingers follow their own path, discovering subtle shifts and gentle pauses she had never noticed before. The music was alive to her, and she felt it listening back. She imagined the hall, imagined the seats, imagined the faces of strangers who would hear her play. But the thought of the room itself, the people, the lights, the sound, it remained distant, as if it were another life she might step into. The closer the day came, the more she felt the quiet flutter of nerves in her chest. She tried not to worry. She reminded herself that she had played for people before, that she had faced small audiences and even critics who had not been kind. But this was different. She would be in a hall where every sound echoed. Every note might travel and linger longer than she expected. Still, she kept her focus on the music. She practiced simple passages over and over, making sure her hands felt at home on the keys. The piece was not difficult, yet she treated it with care, knowing that even simple music, if played with attention, could feel profound. On the morning of the performance, she packed her small bag carefully. Sheet music, a few pencils, a cloth for the keys, a bottle of water. She dressed in a comfortable yet neat outfit, soft colors that would not distract, and shoes that made little sound. She wanted everything to be calm, to be unobtrusive, letting the music carry the evening. Her journey to the hall was quiet, with small streets and low voices of people moving about their day. The city seemed softer in the morning light, as if it knew something delicate was about to happen. She arrived early, as she always did, to give herself space to breathe, to adjust and to observe. The hall was larger than she imagined, and as she entered, she could see the hustle of preparation. Chairs were being arranged, some still stacked in corners. Staff moved quickly with clipboards, checking microphones, adjusting lights and testing the sound system. The piano was in place, but it was covered in a cloth, and she could not help but feel a small ripple of anxiety. It looked smaller from the outside, yet here it was waiting, something tangible and serious. She took a deep breath and walked over, feeling the wood beneath her fingertips as she lifted the cover. The keys looked familiar but strange at the same time. She pressed one gently, testing its response. It was soft and slightly uneven, but it would have to do. She found a quiet corner to sit and observe. Other performers were arriving, each carrying their own sense of purpose and tension. Some spoke softly to their accompanists, some adjusted their instruments with careful hands. She watched, feeling the familiar mix of anticipation and uncertainty in the room. The staff moved around, talking in quick tones, fixing things she did not yet understand. Everything seemed slightly chaotic, a reminder that even the most prepared plans could be disrupted. She kept her attention on the music in her mind, letting it flow through her as a shield against the growing sense of disorder. Time moved forward, and soon it was her turn to be called. She stood, her hands brushing lightly over the keys again, feeling the cool touch and the slight resistance. She walked to the center of the stage, where the audience would soon be seated. She looked out at the empty chairs, imagining the people who would fill them, imagining the faces that might watch and listen. There was a strange mixture of excitement and calm, like standing at the edge of a quiet lake just before the first ripple appears. She sat down, folded her hands briefly, and then opened her sheet music. Her first note was simple, almost shy, a gentle introduction that felt like a handshake to the room. She let the music grow slowly, her fingers following the lines she had known for years. It was easy for her in the sense that she had played it countless times, yet the room was not yet ready to hold it. The sound bounced strangely, carrying in some places, disappearing in others. She adjusted her touch, experimenting silently with the response of each note. She did not rush, did not panic. She let the music move at its own pace, knowing that the room would have to catch up to her, rather than she to it. Outside, she could hear the faint rustle of people arriving, the soft footsteps of staff moving about, the occasional murmur of voices. Inside, her music continued, calm and steady, like a river finding its way through stones. The audience, as it slowly took shape, began to notice her presence. They leaned forward, some curious, some uncertain, drawn by the ease of the melody, the natural way she made even simple notes feel meaningful. She felt their attention gently fold around her. Yet she remained focused, listening to the piano, feeling each vibration, letting the music speak before she did. In that moment, she realized something important. It was not just about playing notes correctly or following the sheet music. It was about creating a space where the room, the audience, and the music itself could exist together. She adjusted her posture, relaxed her shoulders, and let her hands follow the rhythm of her breath. The hall, though still unsettled, began to respond to her presence. The scattered chairs, the echoing walls, the distant sounds of preparation, all became part of the experience, part of the performance. She played the piece once more, this time with a deeper connection, feeling the air around her, listening to the faint hum of anticipation in the audience. She imagined each person in their seat, hearing her music not as something distant, but as a conversation, a gentle exchange. The simplicity of the piece allowed her to explore subtle shifts, small pauses, and tiny flourishes that made the room feel alive. She smiled softly to herself, realizing that sometimes the simplest music could carry the most profound moments. Hours later, after she had practiced, tested the keys, and adjusted to the space, she stepped back and looked at the hall. Though it was not perfectly ready, though the lights flickered and some chairs still leaned unevenly, she felt a quiet confidence. The room was waiting for something, and she was beginning to understand that she could help it find its voice. She carried her bag, straightened her coat, and walked toward the door, ready to return the next day, ready to face the audience, ready to play her simple piece in a room that was learning to be ready for her. She arrived at the music hall early the next morning, the city streets quiet except for the soft hum of early traffic. The sunlight fell gently across the pavements, and she took slow, calm breaths as she approached the building. Her bag hung lightly from her shoulder, filled with sheet music and essentials, though her mind carried more weight. Today would be the real test, the moment when she would face not just the piano but the full space, the full audience. She pushed the thought aside and focused on the small things, the familiar sound of her steps on the hallway tiles, the soft echo of her voice as she greeted the staff, the smell of polished wood and old music that always seemed to linger in halls. Inside, the hall looked larger than it had the day before. Chairs were being arranged more systematically now, but still not in perfect order. Some lights flickered, and a few sound checks were underway. The staff moved quickly, but there was a quiet tension that seemed to hang in the air. She watched them work, noting their faces and gestures, realizing that everyone was trying to bring some calm to a place that still felt unfinished. She did not interfere. She simply observed, letting herself adjust to the environment, feeling how it would respond to her presence. The piano stood at the center of the stage, draped with a protective cloth. She approached it carefully, lifting the cover and running her fingers over the keys. The wood was cool under her touch, the keys slightly uneven, but familiar enough that she felt the connection she always did when she played. She pressed one or two notes, listening to the resonance in the hall. It was different from her practice room, but she knew she could adapt. She reminded herself that the piece was simple, something she could play with her eyes closed if she had to. Yet the space demanded her attention and care. Other performers arrived, bringing with them their own energy. Some were warm and friendly, greeting her with smiles and nods, while others were preoccupied, their eyes scanning the stage, their hands adjusting instruments. She felt a mixture of curiosity and camaraderie, understanding that everyone shared the same nervousness. The audience would not arrive for some time, giving her a moment to settle, to breathe, and to connect with the hall. She sat at the piano and played a few soft notes, letting the music flow gently, feeling the hall respond in its own way, the echoes bouncing and stretching in unpredictable directions. Hours passed slowly, filled with small rehearsals and checks. She listened to other performers, giving them quiet encouragement with nods and smiles. Sometimes she would play a short passage again, adjusting her touch, feeling how the room carried sound. It was not perfect. The piano still had its quirks, and the hall's acoustics created strange echoes. Yet, in each imperfection she found an opportunity. She learned how to move her hands, how to soften or emphasize certain notes, how to let the music float rather than hit sharply. The hall, she realized, was a living thing, reacting and changing with every touch of the keys. Staff moved around her, adjusting lights, testing microphones, and checking the seating arrangements. At one point, she noticed a small group of technicians frowning over the soundboard, whispering to one another. A light flickered above the stage, and she saw a faint expression of worry on someone's face. She did not let it unsettle her. Instead, she played lightly, filling the space with gentle notes, letting the music create a calm bubble amidst the flurry of activity. She could feel the tension in the room slowly shifting, how people paused, how the sound carried differently with each note, how small adjustments made a noticeable difference. The time to perform drew near, and she could hear the soft murmur of the audience arriving outside. Their voices, footsteps, and shifting chairs added to the background of the hall, but she kept her focus on the piano. She ran her hands over the keys again, practicing small sections, memorizing how the sound changed depending on where she pressed and how quickly she moved. She felt a rhythm forming between herself and the room, an unspoken understanding that even if the hall was not yet ready, it could become ready through her music. When the audience finally entered, she could feel the shift in energy. People settled into their seats, some whispering to neighbors, others simply listening. She noticed the varying expressions: curious, skeptical, expectant. She welcomed them in her mind, imagining each listener as a participant in the story she would tell with her simple piece. She adjusted the sheet music slightly, straightened the pages, and took a deep breath. Her fingers hovered above the keys, ready to begin. She did not need to rush. She understood that the room itself needed a few moments to adjust, to absorb the presence of people, the weight of expectation. Her first note was soft, cautious, like dipping a toe into a quiet river. The echo of the hall responded strangely, sometimes stretching longer than she expected, sometimes disappearing almost immediately. She adjusted her touch, listening, letting her hands guide the sound. The audience leaned forward slightly, some noticing the effort, some already moved by the gentle rhythm. She continued, letting the simple melody unfold naturally, aware of the way the room carried sound differently than any place she had ever played. It was both challenging and exhilarating. She could feel the hall slowly beginning to accommodate her, shaping itself to hold the music she created. As the piece continued, small challenges appeared. One key stuck slightly, producing a softer sound than intended. The echoes in one corner created a muddled note that did not quite match her rhythm. Instead of panicking, she adapted, altering her timing, emphasizing other notes, letting the music continue without pause. The audience, unaware of the small struggles she faced, responded only to the flow of her performance. She realized that what mattered was not perfection but presence, the ability to remain calm and steady, to guide the room through her music. Gradually, a quiet connection formed between her, the hall, and the audience. Each note was not just sound but communication. She noticed people leaning forward, eyes fixed, listening more intently. Some closed their eyes, letting the melody carry them. Others tapped lightly to the rhythm without realizing it. She felt the small vibrations in the floor as her fingers moved, the subtle shifts in temperature as lights flickered, and the soft hush of movement from the audience. It was an intricate dance, unspoken yet profoundly felt. The chaos of preparation had not disappeared, but it no longer mattered. The music and the room were beginning to move together. When she reached the middle of her piece, she took a small pause, letting the silence resonate. The hall seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next note. She pressed gently, then more firmly, feeling the keys respond differently with each touch. The melody grew slightly richer, the simple piece becoming layered and full. She smiled softly, recognizing that her efforts to adapt to the imperfect hall had transformed the music. It was no longer just a practice piece. It was alive, shaped by her awareness and the room itself. Time seemed to stretch, the minutes blending seamlessly with the flow of the music. She continued, each note deliberate, each phrase carrying more confidence than the last. The audience, fully engaged, seemed unaware of the minor imperfections. She could hear the soft rustle of clothing, the quiet intake of breath, the faint tapping of feet in rhythm. It was not a grand performance, but it was honest and real. She felt a deep satisfaction, knowing that even a simple piece could hold the attention and hearts of those who listened carefully. As she reached the final notes, she allowed them to linger, letting the sound expand and settle into the corners of the hall. The silence afterward was profound, a shared moment of understanding between performer and audience. She lifted her hands slowly, taking in the expressions around her. Smiles, nods, quiet awe. The room had become ready, in its own imperfect way, shaped by her presence and determination. She realized that this was what performance meant. Not just playing notes, but creating a space where people could connect, even in the midst of disorder. Afterward, she stood and gathered her sheet music, feeling the weight of accomplishment and relief. The staff approached with small smiles and quiet congratulations. The audience began to murmur softly, some standing to leave, some still sitting, savoring the music. She walked off the stage slowly, knowing that the next performance would bring its own challenges, but confident in her ability to adapt and connect. The hall had not been perfect, but together, they had found a rhythm, and she knew that even the simplest piece, played with care and presence, could leave a lasting impression on everyone who listened. The next day, she returned to the hall with a mixture of anticipation and determination. She had thought about the previous day constantly, reviewing how the piano felt, how the space responded, and how the audience had reacted. Today would be the true challenge. The hall seemed slightly different in the morning light, the polished wood glinting and the chairs arranged more carefully. But she noticed small details that made her pause. A key on the piano that still stuck slightly, a flicker in one of the lights, and the faint hum of air conditioning that made the room feel colder than it should. She took a deep breath, reminding herself that these small imperfections were part of the journey. She approached the piano slowly, lifting the cover and running her fingers over the keys. The instrument felt familiar now, but it still had its quirks. One note responded softer than the others, and she made a mental note to adjust her touch. She pressed a few notes, listening to how the sound carried through the room, and imagined the audience sitting in their chairs, ready to hear her. She understood that today, the room itself was a partner in her performance. It might resist her at first, but she could guide it, shape it, and let it carry the music properly. Other performers arrived gradually, each bringing their own energy. Some were excited, sharing greetings and smiles, while others were nervous and focused, tuning instruments or going over last-minute notes. She observed them quietly, noticing the patterns in their movements and the rhythm of their preparation. It reminded her that the hall was not only a place for music, but also a place where people's emotions and intentions intersected. She felt a quiet connection with them, knowing that everyone shared the same vulnerability and hope. As the audience began to arrive, she noticed the subtle changes in the atmosphere. The hum of voices, the shuffle of feet, and the occasional cough created a background rhythm that she had to account for. She adjusted her sheet music, straightened the pages, and ran through a few notes quietly, listening to the echoes and the way sound bounced off the walls. The hall was alive with anticipation, and she felt herself becoming part of its pulse. She knew that the audience's attention was fragile at first, and she needed to draw it gently into the music. When the performance began, she placed her fingers lightly on the keys. The first notes were soft, deliberate, and careful. The piano responded unevenly, some notes softer, some echoing strangely, but she adapted immediately, adjusting the strength and timing of each touch. The audience leaned forward slightly, curious, intrigued by the calm presence she projected. She let her hands move naturally, feeling the music flow through her and into the space. The room began to respond, slowly absorbing the sound and shaping it back to her ears. Halfway through the piece, she encountered unexpected challenges. One note that should have rung clearly produced a dull sound, and a faint squeak came from a hinge on the piano lid. She paused briefly, not to stop, but to adjust her touch and the way she emphasized the surrounding notes. The echo in the far corner created a muddled sound that could have been distracting, but she embraced it, allowing the minor imperfection to become part of the texture of the music. Each challenge became an opportunity to connect more deeply with the room and the people listening. As she played, she noticed the audience's reactions. Some faces were calm and focused, others curious and alert. She sensed the small shifts in posture, the quiet intake of breath, the subtle movement of hands. The room was no longer just a space. It was an active participant. She understood that the hall itself, with its acoustics, echoes, and imperfections, had a voice, and she was learning to listen as much as she was playing. The music became a conversation between her, the piano, the space, and the listeners. Despite the difficulties, her confidence grew. She began to explore subtle variations in tempo and dynamics, using small pauses and changes in intensity to guide the audience through the piece. She discovered new ways to let the sound fill the room, and the music that had seemed simple before became layered, expressive, and full of emotion. She smiled softly, realizing that simplicity was not weakness, but a canvas for creativity and adaptation. The hall, once resistant, was now embracing her music, responding with clarity and warmth. At one point, she glanced up and noticed a small child in the audience, eyes wide and attentive. The child's fascination reminded her of why she played. Not for perfection, not for acclaim, but for the connection and the joy that music could create. She adjusted a phrase slightly, letting it linger longer than usual, allowing the child and the rest of the audience to fully absorb the sound. She felt the energy in the room shift, a quiet recognition that the music was alive, and that each note mattered. She continued with care, mindful of the nuances of the piano, the acoustics, and the audience's reactions. She had learned to anticipate problems before they became distractions, to adapt her touch, timing, and expression with each note. The simple piece transformed in her hands, revealing depth and emotion she had not noticed in practice. The room, once unready, was now a partner in the performance, and the audience responded naturally to the harmony between her music and the space. As the piece approached its conclusion, she allowed the final notes to resonate fully, letting the sound expand into the corners of the hall and linger in the air. The silence that followed was profound, a moment of shared experience between her, the room, and the audience. She lifted her hands slowly from the keys, feeling a mixture of relief, satisfaction, and quiet pride. The imperfections, the challenges, and the unexpected responses had all contributed to a performance that was honest, moving, and memorable. When she finally stood, she noticed the subtle smiles and quiet nods of appreciation from the audience. Staff and fellow performers approached, offering congratulations and soft words of encouragement. She felt a deep sense of accomplishment, knowing that the music had transcended the technical difficulties and the imperfect space. The room had become ready in its own way, shaped by her resilience, patience, and sensitivity. As she left the stage, she reflected on the experience. The piano, the hall, and the audience had challenged her, but she had adapted and grown through the process. She understood that true performance was not about perfection, but about connection, presence, and the courage to face uncertainty with calm and focus. Each imperfection had added character to the music, each challenge had deepened her understanding, and each moment had strengthened her confidence. The day ended with a quiet sense of fulfillment. She packed her sheet music, adjusted her coat, and walked through the hall one last time, appreciating the space that had tested and embraced her. She knew there would be more challenges in the future, more unpredictable moments, but she felt ready to face them. The music had not only spoken to the audience but had spoken to her, teaching patience, adaptability, and the beauty of simple expression. And as she stepped outside into the evening air, she carried with her the quiet knowledge that even in imperfect conditions, music could transform a room and touch the hearts of those willing to listen. She arrived at the hall early once more, carrying her bag and the quiet sense of determination she had developed over the past few days. The streets were calm, and she noticed the small details around her. The gentle sway of trees, the soft footsteps of pedestrians, and the sunlight bouncing off windows. She welcomed the peacefulness, letting it fill her with calm before stepping into the bustling energy of the hall. Inside, she noticed changes from the previous day. Chairs were arranged neatly, the lights were steady, and the hall seemed more prepared. Yet she still sensed small imperfections, slight echoes from the back, a key that did not feel quite right, and the faint sound of the air system humming in the corner. She reminded herself that she could work with these things. She had learned to adapt, and that adaptation gave her confidence. The piano awaited her, the same one she had played for the past days, now feeling familiar yet still unpredictable. She lifted the cover and let her fingers glide across the keys, feeling the subtle differences, the resistance, and the slight unevenness. It was not perfect, but it had personality, and she knew how to make it speak. She pressed a few notes, letting the sound fill the hall, listening carefully to how each note bounced and resonated. The room was alive with potential, and she felt the invisible connection that formed between the performer and the space she occupied. Other performers moved around her, some tuning, some adjusting equipment, all carrying their own nervous energy. She greeted them quietly, feeling the shared understanding that they were all navigating similar uncertainties. Their presence reminded her that a performance was never just about one person. It was a collective moment, shaped by all involved, from the staff to the audience to the fellow musicians. She allowed herself to observe without judgment, letting the energy of preparation inspire rather than intimidate her. The audience began to arrive gradually. Footsteps, whispers, and the shifting of chairs created a gentle background hum. She adjusted her sheet music, straightened the pages, and ran through a few notes softly, testing the hall's acoustics once more. She noticed small things. The way the sound traveled to the far corners, the subtle shifts in resonance depending on how she struck the keys. She understood that today, she needed to be attentive not only to her playing but also to the room itself. The music would need to guide the hall to shape the energy in the space, rather than expecting the space to cooperate without effort. When she began, her fingers moved gently over the keys, producing a soft, deliberate sound. The piano was responsive, though imperfect, and she adjusted her touch instinctively. The room reacted, the echoes finding a rhythm, the walls carrying her notes differently in each corner. She played with care, aware of the audience's attention as it shifted from curiosity to engagement. Some faces were focused, others more relaxed, and she sensed the collective presence of people leaning into the music. The simple piece she played became a vessel for connection, each note a thread linking her to the listeners. Halfway through, small challenges arose. A key stuck slightly, producing a softer sound, and a distant echo from the back of the hall muddled a phrase. Rather than becoming frustrated, she embraced the imperfections, allowing them to shape her interpretation. She adjusted her rhythm, emphasized other notes, and let the music flow naturally. The audience, unaware of the subtle difficulties she navigated, responded to the emotion and intention behind the music. She realized that what mattered was not flawless execution but the honesty and presence she brought to the performance. As she continued, she explored the expressive possibilities of the simple piece. She added gentle variations in tempo, small pauses, and nuanced dynamics that brought the music to life. The hall responded, the sound resonating differently with each movement, creating a dialogue between her and the space. She felt a sense of exhilaration, the thrill of being fully present and engaged, aware of every vibration, every subtle reaction, every breath in the audience. The room and the music were now intertwined, each shaping the other. She noticed a few audience members leaning forward, eyes focused, smiles forming, subtle nods of appreciation. She felt a deep sense of satisfaction knowing that her music was reaching them, touching them, even if in small ways. The challenges she had faced with the imperfect piano and the hall's unusual acoustics had become part of the performance, adding character and depth. She understood that the obstacles were not hindrances but opportunities to create something unique and memorable. During a quiet passage, she allowed the notes to linger, letting the sound expand and fill the hall. The audience listened intently, some closing their eyes to absorb the music fully. She felt the subtle shifts in energy, how the room seemed to respond to the pauses and the gentle crescendos. The simple melody she played had transformed into something richer, shaped by her attention, adaptability, and the responsiveness of the space. Each note carried intention, each phrase carried emotion, and the connection between her, the hall, and the audience deepened. She moved through the final section with careful attention, letting the music flow naturally to its conclusion. The echoes settled, the vibrations softened, and the room seemed to exhale along with her. The audience remained still for a moment, caught in the final resonance of the performance. She lifted her hands from the keys slowly, feeling a mixture of relief and fulfillment. The imperfections she had anticipated were now part of the beauty, part of the shared experience that made the performance unique. As she stood, she noticed the subtle expressions of appreciation in the audience. Quiet smiles, nods, and attentive gazes conveyed understanding and gratitude. Staff and fellow performers approached, offering congratulations and kind words. She felt a deep sense of accomplishment, recognizing that the day's performance had been shaped not by the room's imperfections, but by her ability to adapt, guide, and connect. The music had transformed the hall, and in turn, the hall had shaped the music, creating a living, dynamic experience. Afterwards, she packed her sheet music and personal items, walking through the hall one last time. She observed the space with new awareness, noting how each note, pause, and variation had interacted with the room's unique qualities. She understood that performance was not only about playing notes correctly but also about listening, adapting, and responding to the environment. The simple piece she had chosen had become a canvas for expression, reflection, and connection, proving that even small gestures of art could resonate deeply when approached with care and attention. As she left the hall, the city outside seemed brighter, the air lighter, the sounds softer. She carried with her a sense of quiet triumph and satisfaction. The hall had challenged her, the piano had tested her, and the audience had inspired her. She had met each challenge with patience, focus, and sensitivity, creating a performance that was honest, human, and memorable. She knew that future performances would bring new obstacles, but she felt confident in her ability to adapt, connect, and transform any space into a place where music could be heard, felt, and remembered. The day ended with a sense of quiet accomplishment, a reminder that music was not only a technical skill but a living, breathing conversation between performer, space, and listener. The day of the final performance arrived with a quiet intensity that filled her with a mixture of excitement and nerves. She had rehearsed, adapted, and explored every nuance of the simple piece she would play. The hall was now familiar to her, every echo, shadow, and corner known, yet it still carried an element of unpredictability. She understood that this unpredictability was part of what made live performance alive, and she welcomed it. She dressed carefully, choosing simple clothes that would not distract from her music, and made her way to the hall with measured, calm steps, feeling the weight of anticipation but holding it with quiet confidence. Inside, the hall seemed to breathe differently that day. The chairs were neatly arranged, the lights steady, and the piano awaiting her with a sense of readiness. Staff moved with a calm efficiency, checking last-minute details, and she observed them with appreciation. They had worked hard to prepare the space, but she knew that preparation alone was not enough. The room's readiness would depend on the music she played, on her presence, on the ability to guide the audience into the experience. She approached the piano slowly, lifted the cover, and ran her fingers lightly across the keys, feeling the familiar resistance, the subtle imperfections, and the life within the instrument. Other performers and participants moved quietly around her, tuning, rehearsing, and preparing in their own ways. She greeted them with soft nods, sharing a mutual understanding of the delicate energy required for live performance. The hall itself seemed to hold its breath, aware of the importance of the moment. She could feel the subtle vibrations in the floor, the faint hum of air circulation, and the gentle echoes that would shape her music. She centered herself, letting the calm and focus grow within, understanding that the connection between herself, the piano, and the space would determine the success of the performance. As the audience began to arrive, the atmosphere shifted. The soft murmur of conversation, footsteps on the floor, and the occasional cough created a background rhythm that she could sense but did not let distract her. She adjusted her sheet music, straightened the pages, and ran a few quiet notes, feeling how the hall responded. She knew the simple piece could carry emotional depth if approached with care, and today every note mattered. The audience settled, some leaning forward with curiosity, others sitting back, allowing the music to draw them in. She felt the collective anticipation, the quiet energy waiting to be released through sound. When she placed her fingers on the keys, the first notes were soft and deliberate. The piano, with its familiar imperfections, responded to her touch, and the room began to absorb the sound. She adjusted instinctively, altering pressure and timing to accommodate the space, guiding the resonance with gentle precision. The audience, focused and attentive, began to follow her lead. She could sense their engagement, their silent acknowledgement of the music, and it gave her strength. The room and the music were entwined, each note shaping the space, each echo returning a subtle reply. Halfway through the performance, small challenges arose, as they always did. One key responded with a muted tone. Another note carried an unexpected echo. She did not let these disruptions distract her. Instead, she used them as opportunities to explore the expression of the piece. She adjusted the dynamics, emphasized neighboring notes, and allowed slight pauses to create tension and release. The audience, unaware of these technical challenges, felt only the seamless flow and emotional depth of the music. She smiled softly, realizing that imperfections could enhance the honesty of a performance, giving it texture and character. She became fully immersed in the music, aware of the hall, the piano, and the audience simultaneously. Each phrase was carefully crafted, yet fluid, allowing for subtle variations in tempo and volume. The room seemed to respond, the acoustics shaping her touch, the echoes creating layers she had not anticipated. She felt the audience leaning in, drawn into the rhythm, some closing their eyes, others absorbing every note with quiet concentration. The simple melody took on a richness, becoming a conversation between performer, instrument, space, and listeners. In a quieter section of the piece, she allowed the music to linger, stretching the sound and letting it fill the corners of the hall. The audience listened intently, fully absorbed in the gentle yet expressive tone. She felt a connection forming, a shared experience that transcended words. The small child she had noticed in a previous performance now sat with wide eyes, captivated, and she allowed a longer pause, letting the note resonate and giving the child, and everyone else, a moment to inhabit the music. This simple gesture created a ripple through the hall, a collective sense of presence and attentiveness that strengthened the performance. As she moved toward the final section, her confidence grew. She adjusted the phrasing, added subtle shifts in dynamics, and allowed the natural flow of the piece to guide her. The hall and the audience moved with her, creating a harmonious interplay between sound, space, and human presence. She felt exhilarated, fully alive in the moment, aware of every detail, every reaction, every echo. The simple piece, intended to be easy, had become a complex and moving experience, transformed by her understanding, adaptability, and the responsiveness of the room. The final notes approached, and she allowed them to resonate fully, letting the sound expand and settle naturally. The room seemed to hold its breath, the audience attentive and quiet, absorbing the lingering tones. She lifted her hands slowly from the keys, feeling a mixture of relief, satisfaction, and quiet triumph. The performance had navigated the challenges of the piano, the hall, and the acoustics, emerging as something authentic and memorable. She realized that the true power of music lay not in perfection but in connection, presence, and the courage to embrace uncertainty. After the performance, she stood and observed the audience. Faces glowed with appreciation, quiet smiles and nods of understanding spreading throughout the hall. Staff and fellow performers approached, offering congratulations and gentle encouragement. She felt a deep sense of accomplishment, recognizing that her music had transformed the room and reached the hearts of those who listened. The hall had become ready through her guidance, her sensitivity, and her commitment to the piece. The imperfections, the echoes, and the subtle challenges had all contributed to the richness of the experience. She gathered her sheet music, adjusting her coat and bag, and walked through the hall one last time. The space, once chaotic and unready, now felt complete, shaped by the music, the audience, and the performer's energy. She reflected on the journey, understanding that the process had taught her valuable lessons about patience, adaptation, and the beauty of imperfection. Music was not merely a sequence of notes. It was a living conversation between performer, space, and listener, each element influencing the other. Today, she had experienced that truth fully. Outside the hall, the evening air felt gentle and welcoming. The streets were calm, the city quieting down, and she walked with a light step, carrying a sense of satisfaction and fulfillment. She knew that future performances would bring new challenges, unexpected moments, and unpredictable spaces, but she felt ready. The simple piece she had played had become a testament to resilience, adaptability, and the power of human connection through music. She understood that her ability to navigate imperfection, embrace the unexpected, and communicate through sound had created something lasting and memorable. As she made her way home, she thought about the audience, the hall, and the piano, recognizing the collaborative nature of the experience. Each element had contributed to the performance, and each had been shaped by her attention, intention, and sensitivity. She felt gratitude for the opportunity, for the lessons learned, and for the quiet triumph of a simple piece that had become extraordinary. The experience reminded her that music, at its best, transcends technical skill, speaking directly to the human heart and soul. It was a performance she would remember, not for perfection, but for the beauty of connection, presence, and transformation that she had created through sound.